Good morning. Today is a day that's been about 15 years in the making. And for me, it's a really significant day because it's the day that I can tell the truth completely sober, knowing that it's enough to have told the truth to myself. And that's the reason I guess I'm here, is to tell you that the truth matters to you, if nobody else. And it took me a long time to figure out what about me, what about my personality, what about my genetics, what about my upbringing put me in the position that I was in. The position being afraid for my life in the middle of the woods in southern Indiana 15 years ago, waiting for my former cult leader to return so that I could end a cycle of abuse and predation that had been occurring both for myself and for my best friend, who was recovering from heroin use. And so I guess for me, it's been difficult to know where to start, because the natural inclination, of course, with anyone in this position is to want to over explain and to try to give you all the information, why I would do something so crazy. And to be honest, I didn't really know until I came out as trans 3 months ago why I manifested, why I chose to put myself in these incredibly compromising situations. But learning about my neurodivergence, understanding hereditary neurodivergence, and how stress and inflammation affect your prefrontal cortex, your decision making, all these things I learned when I got sober from alcohol 19 months ago. Right now I've been completely sober for a few days, but in general, I've been medicating my PTSD with cannabis, because it's hard for me to be around people. I'm staying at the house where this person baptized me, which is my parents' house. And let's just say inner child healing means something for me that goes back to not just my inner child, but my mom's inner child, my dad's inner child, their parents' inner children. And through my research, I guess, through my honest self-inspection and self-reflection, I saw this whole lineage. I saw my whole family in a completely different light, and I grew up in the nation's largest suburb, 2017's most conservative city in America. And so when I was finally able to come out, it was weird, because I was like, is this a trauma response? Is this something that I've created for myself? Did I split off a female personality, or have I always been this way. And now that I know who I am, that yes, the answer is yes, I've always been trans, but like, I've also always been neurodivergent, and I've also always had this insane sensitivity in this, what they call an absorptive personality. And in so many ways, so does my mom. Her and I are so similar. Both Virgos, both very driven, both very goal-oriented, and up until recently, both of us couldn't get what we wanted done because of our ADHD. It was, especially after my assault, it was almost too painful to stay in the present. And I guess this is what this video is about. It's about telling the truth. It's about allowing myself to remember that I'm part of a greater collective. I'm part of humanity, and I'm doing my best, and this is part of it. So thank you for listening. Thank you for being here with me. It's, I would say, probably unlike any story you've heard, probably recently at least. So I'm going to try to be as very open and considerate as I can in terms of like triggers. I'm not going to just launch into some stuff that's going to fuck you up, but I will be honest, some of this stuff is pretty disturbing. Because people do the craziest shit to find love, and I think we're all capable of love. We all deserve love. I think we come from love and we go to love, and I don't define love like I used to. Part of this self-discovery process involved me leaving my entire life behind in hospitality, and my entire 7-year marriage, or 5-year marriage, a 7-year relationship, and 13 years of dedicated alcoholism. And so that sobriety process is certainly an extension of what you're hearing right now. I mean, it's not easy. It's not easy to tell the truth, okay? Like, it's just not, And that's because we're scared of each other, right? We're gods to each other. We give and take from each other so easily and so thoughtlessly sometimes. And I've always felt myself being more sensitive to other people than they are to me in some ways. That's partially like a hereditary martyr thing, and just partially because I'm just more sensitive than other people. So when I say sensitive, there's two different components I'm really talking about. The first is what they call sensory processing sensitivity, and that's a condition that affects hundreds of species. If you just kind of think of a bell curve, there's going to be 80% of the population with average kind of sight, smell, taste, touch, all that, and then 10% with lower and 10% with higher. And so for me, it's been like a really revealing journey to discover that, my dad, who probably could be considered autistic by some measures, fits certain qualifications, definitely has sensory processing sensitivity. And it's, he's a super taster. He's got exquisite hearing, loves music, communicates vibrationally in ways that not many people I know do, but has social anxiety, doesn't find himself connecting with people, and has been working the same job in Arizona for almost 50 years, the same corporation. And my mom, who was raised in the fundamental Christian mentality in that culture, grew up desperate for attention from two parents that were really absorbed in the performance ritual that is religion, and essentially neglected their kid to the point where she continued to develop this unhealthy obsession with exercise. Addiction runs kind of concurrently with sensitivity a lot of times, because it's intense to be around people in ways, and especially when your sensitivity extends to your empathy, you physically embody people's emotions in ways that are difficult to explain, difficult to understand. If you don't know that it's a thing, you just assume that there's something wrong with you. And especially as somebody that's in a biological male body, especially when I grew up and where I grew up, everyone's, all these kids are calling each other faggot and punching each other in the face, and we're playing Smear the Queer. So I'm like, not surprised it took me this long to come out to myself, because it was unsafe for me to do so for most of my life, and by the time I I was already a dedicated alcoholic, married to a woman, desperately trying to not die, and so with that, I think it's important to understand and to say that this isn't about throwing dirt on anybody. This isn't about blame or shame or guilt, because those things will kill you. They're toxic and they don't do anything good. That's just shit we try to use to control each other's behavior. And for me, that was why I drank so heavily, was because I felt like I was completely compromised as an individual because of the choices that I made. But the truth is, I was abused. I was groomed, and I was super, super vulnerable. So it was really difficult for me to admit to myself that all of these things were empirically valid, I guess, for me. And so that's why this video is so important, because everyone has parts of their life that, have some question marks, have some kind of weird red flags, I guess. And my life has been one giant fucking red flag in so many ways, that it's really beneficial for me to just put it out there that, these things do happen. People do get up to some really raunchy shit, and they ruin people's lives. People die as a result. I mean, I've barely gotten through it, and that's because as ignorant as I grew up, as ignorant as some of my family has been, I am loved, and I was not physically abused at all. I was not mistreated like that, and that's the only reason I'm still here. So yeah, I mean, it's now that you kind of have some general idea of where I'm coming from, I think for me, it's also important to discuss that certain spiritual aspects of my story have been really difficult for me to understand until very recently. I hated God for putting me in the position that I was in, for letting this creature prey on myself and my friends, and for exposing my youngest sibling, who's also trans, to this person, this monster that could have been me, and the truth is, everyone in my family is good. We all, my siblings out as of this year. They're no longer over medicating. They're no longer choosing to hide from themselves, and neither am I. So that's worth a video right there. And yeah, so I wanted to make this video at sunrise because this is what it means to me for to speak openly about what happened. And so for me, it was just this classic, almost stereotype at this point of this gifted kid who's in the closet, is looking for attention, is trying to find the secret to their own happiness and fulfillment, and is just too goddamn smart for their own good, and is so sensitive that they can't pick up anything that their parents or anybody around them is putting down because they're so obviously miserable and it's not working. So forcing myself to want to go to church when there's actual child sex predators in the congregation, children that don't understand me. I'm reading at a college reading level by the time I'm 12 years old, like 13 years old. It's been, my whole life has been this like extended like question mark essentially of just like, what the fuck am I doing here? Who am I, and why do I feel like I'm not supposed to be? Like, why is nobody here telling the truth? And then this is part of me choosing to be a part of the solution, because if I don't talk about what my experiences are, how can I expect anybody else to be honest? So, if there's anybody that this is directed towards, it's trans, queer, different kids in, between the ages of 16 and 25. And I mean, statistically, especially kids with ADHD, which is more and more of us, our executive dysfunction, our impulse control, our rates of adrenal burnout, failure, all these things, that's something I experienced at like 19 years old. I've been working since I was 15 in restaurants and food service, and because I was raised, by the son of an immigrant with very little extra resources, and the daughter of someone who was raised on the frontier in Alaska and a farmer, and the daughter of a steel worker, adopted daughter of a plant worker in Michigan, so it's like I have a wide variety of humanity in my family, like, but they're all kind of conservative, I guess, for lack of a better word. We just don't have a lot of exposure to other cultures or whatever, and being raised in Arizona certainly didn't help. I would say, I think around the time I was raised, it was about 97% white. I didn't even meet my first black person, my first melanated human, until I was 12 years old. And what's telling is I heard the N-word probably 4 years before that. And it wasn't necessarily in a malicious way, as much as a malicious word can be used non-maliciously, but at the same time, like, I've heard it since I've been back. I've been back here for a year, so some things just don't change. Like, people out here are different, so and that's okay, like, I think so many people of quote-unquote Caucasian complexion are realizing that they don't want to perpetuate these negative stereotypes. They don't want to subscribe to the hatred that has fueled the division and the pain in this country for so long, but they also don't feel valid enough to to participate in some of these conversations. And it is important to acknowledge that until we are able to hold space for all the parties involved, there's not going to be the substantive change that we really require to move forward as a society. I'm really grateful for all of these advances in artificial general intelligence and all this new technology, but the truth is we still need each other to apply this. And when we're talking real life trauma triggers, it's not about new information, it's about learning how to regulate your nervous system, you know? And I mean, I guess in some ways you need to know about your nervous system in order to regulate it, but you know, just being able to talk about what happened, to tell the story and not have my heart rate go up, my palms get sweaty, you know, all the hypervigilance symptoms is huge for me, you know. And like I didn't know I had ADHD. My mom certainly didn't know she had ADHD. She just thought she had a lot of energy and had a hard time focusing in certain situations. But as my academic career progressed, as I grew up, I realized that caffeine was something that really affected me in a way that I enjoyed, but that I became addicted to very quickly. And honestly, the same goes for pornography and sex. Like, I was a very sheltered child. Like, I was not allowed to watch Power Rangers because it was too violent. So it was like, where do I go with my humanity when the church is saying masturbation is evil? You need to control yourself because God hates you, and God's not gonna show favor to you unless you can keep it in your pants. And I'm like a 15, 16-year-old kid who's also trans and lonely as fuck. So all that shame and guilt, all that does is make it so that we get turned on by hiding things from ourselves, by hiding things from others, by being ashamed, by doing controversial or unhealthy, self-destructive things. So just to prove to ourselves that whatever, like we can regulate that way. So sad, you know? And like, we deserve so much better. But that's not what I had then, you know? So I played the hand I was dealt, and when I graduated, I had an academic scholarship. I was an academic decathlon. I was in the lowest GPA bracket, which made sense since I could not bring myself to care about being a successful corporate anything, you know? Like, I went to ASU for one semester and then broke up with my high school girlfriend after basically becoming like addicted to the physicality of our relationship and realizing that she wanted more and I didn't, you know. But for me, I had no basis point or reference point for the fallout, the emotional fallout of my first sexually intimate relationship, and the guilt and the shame that came from trying to reconcile that pleasure with the religious conditioning that I had received. So I felt like a really bad person, and on top of that, I was going to Arizona State and had all these grand dreams since I was probably 7 years old of like attending university and finally being around peers that could understand me intellectually, that cared the same way I cared. Because I was a very active person, even in high school, when it came to activism and representing and advocating for the people and the causes that I believed in. Ironically, that cause was an organization called Invisible Children, who the founders of which were in Uganda documenting the atrocities of Joseph Kony and the Lord's Resistance Army. And I got the movie shown to my entire high school class of like 900. We did a benefit concert. We got to work together to create some beautiful awareness and change. And obviously the money we raised went to an organization that truthfully was not equipped to do anything other than raise awareness. And I mean, I guess it's something, but at the same time, it wasn't enough. And so when I got to ASU, I was like, man, I just want to keep this going. This is right before Obama runs for office. I'm like, change is real, change is possible. And pretty quickly I realized that I was not like everyone else. This was not something that people were really serious about. And so I became really disillusioned. I just dropped out. I was working at Starbucks at the time. I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna focus on work. I feel so guilty all the time. I need to go back to reading my Bible. So that's what I did. I checked out a copy of the Hebrew Old Testament from the Hayden Library, and I just started reading, and I've been reading more or less nonstop since I was old enough to read. 4 years old, 3 years old, and like I'm just one of those people. Like I have one of those memories that just is there. I can pull stuff out of the air that it shocks me sometimes. So that was my way of escape. I was living in more or less an alternate reality. That was kind of like drugs to me, right? So I was desperate for activities, so to speak, for experiences that forced me to stay in the present, and like, it's not anybody's fault. I think that's one of my most beautiful attributes. It certainly has helped define my character in many ways, but I was raised, I was never given the birds and the bees. I had no idea what sex meant to my father, and I was sent to porn rehab basically as soon as I could drive, because my parents found out that I was looking up not even naked ladies in lingerie, like just beautiful women that I admired, who I didn't realize I saw myself in. But they were so scared that I was going to turn into some sort of raging addict that I became a raging addict. And I was psychoanalyzed and hypnotized. And I basically thought that there was demons chasing me. And like, that's a shitty feeling for a teenager who's already depressed. Like, I didn't know I was depressed because I was trans. I just knew that I didn't feel like anybody understood me until I started dating, and my first real girlfriend her dad was from Tunisia, and when she converted to Christianity, her dad beat the shit out of her. And like, at the time I was like, damn, like that's real faith, and she took me to my first real church, and these are real people without the resources that I grew up with, and yet they're out there praising God in ways that I found to be super authentic, genuine, and so necessary for me at the time. Although it was kind of scary, it was different for sure, different culture. But at the same time, I felt welcomed and accepted by these people, black people, people of color, that I never felt especially in the church, but even from my own family members sometimes. So I'm reading the Bible. I'm really kind of looking for friends. I get plugged into this Bible study of young men sensitive young men that don't necessarily agree with the dogma of the capitalist version of the Christian church, right? Which is not, it's not difficult, especially these days, to spot the hypocrisy. But especially when you're that age, especially when you might be autistic, you might have closeted trans stuff going on. I found myself like feeling very identified with underdogs and with people that have been oppressed and marginalized, because I felt like I was having to marginalize myself from myself. Does that make sense? You know, like, so as part of that, there was a friend of mine. I was thrilled that I was around wrestlers and big manly men, because I felt like they could teach me what it meant to be a man. And my dad, although he's a big human, 6'7", didn't have any idea what it meant to be a man. Like, all they knew was work, provide, don't be a dick, you know, or don't hurt your family. And that's not to say that they didn't love me, but they, you know, like, that's what his dad taught him. That's his dad worked at the county in Northern California for like 40 years after military service. So, and cheating on his spouse, like, it is what it is, you know. But there was a missionary that was staying with one of my friends through this church, and boy, I know you know how this story ends. And his quote-unquote testimony was that he used to be a high-powered executive, played the game, made all the money, but was miserable, and found Jesus, gave away all his money, sold all his houses, and became this essentially itinerant missionary. And at 18 years old, that's exactly what I wanted to do. And so I kind of just naturally felt attracted towards this person who seemed to have this spiritual authority, this wisdom, this air of knowledge. And through that group, I also met my best friend Jake,